Hey, welcome back to Dukes on Switch. Back today with a BANT Maverick deck tech. This is a deck list that I've been wanting to play around for a little while, and I think there's room for it in the format. So this is a pretty non-traditional list because it is running Brainstorm, a deck that usually Maverick is fighting against and trying to shut down rather than actually play itself. Especially in a deck that traditionally plays cards like Thalia, Garden of Thraben, playing as many creature spells as possible is optimal because you don't want to be taxing yourself with Thalia more than your opponent. But one issue that I've been having recently with Maverick is I've been drawing dead cards, and I've been drawing cards that aren't relevant. So the top of the deck can be a killer. So with Maverick, you don't have too much control over that. You can play Sylvan Library, but if you don't have Library out, you can just draw into 3 lands in a row, 5 lands in a row. A card like Collector Ouphe against a deck that isn't even playing artifacts. So although Green Suns is of course a really powerful engine in grabbing those silver bullets, like Collector Ouphe, like Scavenging Ooze, you can come up against matchups where they're just not relevant. They're 2/2 vanilla creatures, they feel really bad, and you don't really have anything to do with them other than attack. Another one is Wasteland. Wasteland feels pretty bad right now against a lot of the snow decks, and can just be, pretty much just a waste. So having Brainstorm accomplishes 2 things. It allows you to keep a hand that you think is pretty good in the blind, and if it isn't, based on the first few turns of your opponent, you can then manipulate your hand to be better positioned against that deck. So if you keep a hand with Swords to Plowshares against Storm, you can hopefully then Brainstorm it away and find cards like Thalia or Collector Ouphe. The other thing is, if you have a bunch of Wastelands against a snow deck, you don't have to play them out. You can keep them in hand, and then when it comes time, you can actually Brainstorm them away and hopefully find either lands that are actually going to be effective in casting your spells, or find spells that are actually going to have an impact on the board state. So I think because of how the current mega game's positioned, and how Thalia isn't too effective, especially against cards like Dreadhorde Arcanist, I think there's room for Brainstorm in this list. So I am going to try it out. that's the reasoning. I think it's very easy to say, oh, Maverick, Brainstorm, that doesn't go together. But I think it's definitely worth at least testing it, evaluating the games that we play with it, and then maybe making an actual kind of final opinion at the end of that, after we've had some reps with it. But yeah, I just think that the amount of matches that I've been losing because I haven't had that card selection, I think Brainstorm is probably the card that I've been looking for. So this should be pretty interesting. The list otherwise is pretty solid in regards to how BANT usually is played these days. Some players are going just for an Oko main deck and some sideboard cards like Meddling Mage, not playing main deck Teferi or even Uro. Uro is a very interesting one. I've played Uro in multiple leagues with Maverick, but I've never actually green sunned for it. There's never been a case where I've actually wanted it over another Reliquary, but I do think it's a really powerful card, and I think it should be in the list because the times that I have drawn it, I've been happy to draw it. And even against decks like Delver, it can be very hard for them to get back from you having an Uro in play, and even that first trigger of 3 life draw a card, put a land into play, is pretty huge. So Uro is really nice because it also turns our graveyard into more of a resource than just Scavenging Ooze. So we do have multiple spells we can actually cast from the graveyard now, or at least use the graveyard in a way that we're going to be able to kind of extend our hand between just our hand to the hand and yard, which is kind of cool. Gilded Goose is an interesting one. I did have a split of 4 Hierarch 2 Bird, but I think Goose is worth it in this list. I think against a lot of the Delver decks, the extra 3 life from a food can be very relevant. And also it works well with Oko. So if we can go Gilded Goose turn 1, Oko turn 2, having the food already available is really nice if we want to be aggressive. And I think the O2 body is actually relevant as well, especially against an unflipped Delver. Goblin Lackey with goblins actually seeing a lot more play now. And just being another flyer as well is quite nice. The board I've kept pretty tame. So Deafening Silence is against combo, Leyline for graveyard decks. I really want to have a no-nonsense way to deal with the graveyards. And with Brainstorm in the deck, we can, of course, just hopefully brainstorm away the ley lines that we draw after having one in play. Force of Vigor is another card that I've been really enjoying. Some of the games that I've been losing with Maverick have been to fast Blood Moons, things like Painter, cards like Ensnaring Bridge, and even some of the mid-range matchups like Loam. I have been losing out to like a Mox Diamond start and then Sylvan Library. So having Force of Vigor I think is really nice. It also allows us to play on curve and then also have interaction that we can hold up. And it's not too hard to keep up Force, which is nice. Because we do have a few green cards in the list. Savine's Reclamation is just a kind of a fun of, but I think it's a really good card for the mid-range matchups, especially in a deck where you can get back Oko or Teferi on top of creatures like Knight or Scooze. I really like that it can be a 3-for-1, which is really nice, so I think that's a really solid card. Ramunap's in the sideboard because I think Ramunap is a great strategy, especially with a Wasteland, but it's not something that I want main deck against a metagame that is filled with snow control. So Ramunap against a lot of basics isn't doing too much, but if we can identify that it's going to be good in games 2 and 3 against the deck, then I'm definitely going to bring it in. Gaddock Teeg is an interesting one. You can read my latest article on Gaddock Teeg on thegreensunzenith.com, where we discussed it and its role in Maverick. Since the printing of Collector Ouphe and a few other things, I think that it still has a place in the 75, but it's not the main deck silver bullet that was as good as it used to be. So I still like Teeg against combo. Hex Drinker I think is a really good card. I've won a lot of games now of Hex Drinker, which has been really nice, but I think you have to pick your battles with Hex Drinker, and you have to know when to bring it in and when to not bring it in, because there's a lot of decks that will punish you by putting a ton of mana into it and then just dealing with it. It's not the greatest against Oko unless you can get it up to its protection from everything ASAP, but even then, it's a very hard thing to achieve. But there are some decks where if you give it protection from instants, they have a very hard time dealing with it. The 2 parts as well, I just find as probably the best sideboard removal spell right now, especially with Rug Delver in the format, and kind of tier 0. Path is just a great removal spell because they don't usually run a basic. I have seen some lists where they are running a basic snow-covered island, but we haven't run into it yet, which is nice. Last card I want to talk about is Sylvan Safekeeper. Safekeeper is nice because I'm not running Mother of Runes. I think Mum's not in the greatest spot where I've always liked to say, and I know it's been said before, that the activation of Mother is much scarier than Mother actually activating. And I think right now with cards like Dreadhorde Arcanist and Oko, when your opponent doesn't have to dig for 2 removal spells and can actually start the fight by pressuring your Mother first, then they usually have another way to deal with it very, very soon after. So I don't think Mum is great. Plague Engineer is seeing some play, but it's not as much as when it was first printed. But I think it's nice to have some piece of protection in the deck. And I like Safekeeper because A, you can find it with Green Suns. B, it comes down and instantly protects. It doesn't have summoning sickness. It doesn't have summoning sickness. And also, it can just win you the game out of nowhere with another Reliquary, because your opponent might not take into consideration how many lands you can actually sack to it, to hopefully make the Knight lethal on a turn your opponent didn't think it was lethal. So that's pretty much the deck. One card I did miss out on is Scryb Ranger, and I think I will actually add that in because I think Scryb Ranger is still just a really solid card right now. The Pro Blue is really relevant against the Delver decks. Saving lands is really nice. And I think I'm actually happy to go down on a Noble Hierarch. I don't want to have too many Nobles in the deck, and I think 5 is fine, plus Dryad Arbor as a 6th to make sure that we try to have a turn 1 into a turn 2 3-drop like Oko or Teferi or Knight. So this should be pretty fun. We'll see how it goes. Apologies for stumbling. I get kind of nervous on camera, but hopefully that was fine. Yeah, hopefully you enjoyed the league. We'll see how this goes, and I'll see you in match 1. Thanks.